Have you ever walked outside to find your disabled child hanging from a street lamp, used as a warning by a neighborhood tyrant? What would you do if the person responsible had no idea you were an FBI agent and a parent ready to bring the full force of justice? My name is David Wilson. I'm 54, a special agent with the FBI, and a widower raising my daughter, Sarah. She's 13, brilliant, and tougher than anyone gives her credit for. She also has muscular dystrophy and relies on a wheelchair, secured with adaptive straps for safety. After my wife died, I moved us to the so-called safe suburban community in Virginia. A place advertised for its accessibility, good schools, and caring neighbors. I thought I was doing the right thing for Sarah. I thought we'd finally found peace. But there's always someone who sees difference as a threat. In our case, that someone is Mrs. Baker, the HOA president. She's the kind of woman who believes her power is absolute, that her rules matter more than kindness or decency. For 2 years, she's made life miserable for anyone she considers undesirable. Families like mine, families with disabled members, immigrants, gay couples. She hides her cruelty behind paperwork, fines, and icy smiles. The day it happened was supposed to be special. It was Sarah's birthday. We'd invited a handful of neighbors and their kids for cake and games on our front lawn. Sarah had made a colorful banner herself, her hands shake sometimes. But she was so proud of it. The sun was shining, and for a moment it felt like we belonged. That illusion shattered in seconds. I'd stepped inside to grab Sarah's medication when I heard a scream, raw, terrified, and unmistakably hers. I dropped everything and ran outside. What I saw will haunt me forever. Sarah, hanging 6 feet off the ground from our street lamp, her wheelchair tipped over below, her face red and contorted as she struggled to breathe. The straps meant to keep her safe had been used to hoist her up. And below her, phone in hand, stood Mrs. Baker. She was taking photos, her voice cold and triumphant. This is what happens when you break HOA rules. Neighbors froze in shock. Kids started crying. For a second, I couldn't move, couldn't believe this was real. Then instinct took over. I sprinted to the lamp, shouting for help. Tom, my friend and fellow agent, rushed over. Together, we unfastened the straps and lowered Sarah into my arms. She was sobbing, shaking, but alive. Mrs. Baker didn't flinch. Just teaching her a lesson, she said, brushing imaginary dust off her designer jacket. Maybe now you'll follow the rules. No unsightly decorations. No wheelchairs cluttering the street. I wanted to scream. Instead, I held Sarah close and checked her for injuries. She was bruised but safe. The neighbors gathered around us, some offering help, others staring in horror, afraid to get involved. Mrs. Baker turned to the crowd, raising her phone. Let this be a lesson to all of you. Rules are rules. Break them and there are consequences. I looked at my daughter, her face streaked with tears, and something inside me hardened. For 15 years, I've hunted criminals, seen the worst humanity has to offer, but nothing prepared me for seeing my own child used as a warning, her disability weaponized by someone who thought she was untouchable. How would you react if someone abused your child under the guise of community rules? Would you stay silent, or would you fight back with everything you have? Tell me what you'd do. Share your stories, because this is just the beginning and Mrs. Baker has no idea who she's dealing with. But as I comforted Sarah, I realized this wasn't just an act of cruelty, it was a warning. And Mrs. Baker had powerful friends. I moved quickly, my FBI training kicking in. First, I photographed every bruise on Sarah's arms and neck, the angry red marks from the straps that had been twisted for harm. My hands shook, but I kept my voice calm for Sarah's sake. I asked Tom and the other neighbors to recount exactly what they'd seen and heard. Some, like the Harrisons, were eager to help, their voices trembling with outrage. Others hesitated, glancing nervously at the Baker house, already wary of the fallout. I requested copies of any doorbell footage and phone videos. Within an hour, I had 3 angles of the incident saved to a secure drive, one clearly showing Mrs. Baker's face as she hoisted Sarah up, her expression cold and deliberate. But Mrs. Baker wasn't rattled. Instead, She called an emergency HOA meeting that very afternoon. The invitation, sent to every resident, accused Sarah of endangering others, and me of falsely accusing her. The meeting was a circus. Mrs. Baker stood at the front, flanked by the HOA board, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. She was blocking the sidewalk, Mrs. Baker announced, waving a printout of the HOA's accessibility rules. And her father has made wild, defamatory claims against me. I won't tolerate threats to our community's safety. I tried to speak, but the board cut me off. That's when I learned the real reason for Mrs. Baker's confidence. Her husband was Judge Baker, a man with a reputation for shielding his wife from consequences. The board members, all longtime friends of the Bakers, closed ranks. They threatened me with fines for defamation and disruption, hinting at legal action if I didn't drop my complaint. The neighborhood split in two. Some, like Tom and the Harrisons, were horrified and quietly offered support. Others, cowed by fear or loyalty, avoided my gaze, whispering about troublemakers. I saw the worry in their eyes. No one wanted to be next on Mrs. Baker's list. After the meeting, as I gathered Sarah's things, I noticed a small, leather-bound notebook on the ground near the podium. It must have fallen from Mrs. Baker's bag. I picked it up, intending to return it, but a name on the open page stopped me cold. At the very top, in bold, underlined letters, Sarah Wilson removal necessary. Below, a list of problem neighbors, each with chilling notes. Fence too high. Unapproved paint color. Wheelchair visible from street. Next to Sarah's name, a single word, example. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about rules. This was a campaign, a systematic effort to purge anyone who didn't fit Mrs. Baker's vision for the neighborhood. And Sarah, my daughter, had just been made the ultimate warning. I slipped the notebook into my pocket. The evidence was mounting, but so was the danger. Mrs. Baker had powerful friends and a plan, and I was just beginning to uncover how deep her influence ran. What Mrs. Baker didn't know: the man she tried to scare off was assembling a federal task force, and she'd just become the target. The morning after the HOA meeting, I sat at my kitchen table, Sarah's hand in mine, and made the hardest call of my career. As much as I wanted to lead the charge, I recused myself from the direct investigation. My personal stake was too great, and the Bureau's integrity demanded it. But that didn't mean I was powerless. At the FBI field office, I gathered a trusted team of agents with backgrounds in public corruption, civil rights, and financial crimes. I laid out the evidence: photos of Sarah's injuries, video from 3 doorbell cameras showing Mrs. Baker's assault, and the notebook with its chilling removal list. I presented statements from neighbors and the digital trail of threats and fines. This wasn't just abuse, it was conspiracy and, possibly, racketeering. The agents listened in silence, their faces hardening as the scope became clear. We're not just looking at assault, I told them. This is organized harassment, discrimination, and financial crime. And Mrs. Baker's husband is the sitting judge. Within hours, the Bureau authorized a task force, echoing the model used to root out public corruption in other states. Agents from the FBI, IRS, and Department of Justice joined forces, each bringing their own expertise. Surveillance teams were assigned to the Bakers and key members of the HOA board. We coordinated with federal prosecutors and the Civil Rights Division, whose mission is to ensure equal opportunity and justice for people with disabilities. Surveillance and the web of corruption. The investigation moved quickly. Undercover agents attended HOA meetings, posing as prospective homebuyers. Forensic accountants began tracing HOA funds, while technical teams monitored communications between board members. The surveillance paid off. We uncovered a web of criminal activity that reached far beyond our neighborhood. Bank records revealed Judge Baker's secret accounts, each tied to shell corporations that received regular transfers from the HOA's operating budget. Large sums were funneled through fake maintenance contracts and consulting fees, then laundered into personal investments, a pattern seen in major HOA fraud cases around the country. The HOA board, handpicked by Mrs. Baker, rubber-stamped every expense. But the rot ran deeper than embezzlement. Interviews with other families, those who had been bullied, fined, and driven out revealed a chilling pattern. Minorities, disabled residents, and LGBTQ+ couples had been systematically harassed and targeted with bogus violations. Many were forced to sell their homes below market value. Their properties quickly snapped up by board members' associates and resold for profit. The Bakers and their inner circle were running a racket, using the HOA as a tool for discrimination, financial gain, and social engineering. As the evidence mounted, I reached out to allies outside law enforcement. I connected with a prominent civil rights attorney who specialized in housing discrimination and with national disability advocacy groups. Together, we began building a class action lawsuit, representing every family targeted by the Bakers regime. The legal team documented each instance of harassment, each discriminatory fine, and each forced sale. The advocates brought in experts on the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act, ensuring our case addressed not just the criminal conspiracy but the broader civil rights violations. We gathered testimony from families who had been too afraid to speak out before people who had been told, again and again, that fighting the HOA was pointless. Now, with the FBI and federal prosecutors on their side, hope returned. Word spread quickly that the FBI was investigating. Some neighbors, once cowed by fear, found new courage. They came forward with their own stories and evidence, emboldened by the sight of federal agents canvassing the neighborhood. Others, loyal to the Bakers or complicit in the scheme, closed ranks and lawyered up. The HOA board tried to stonewall, hiring their own attorneys and accusing my family of orchestrating a vendetta. But the evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, financial records, and the testimony of dozens of victims painted a damning picture. As the investigation deepened, we discovered the Bakers' reach extended beyond our community. They had advised other HOAs on problem resident management, exporting their methods to neighborhoods across the region. The task force coordinated with other FBI offices, uncovering parallel schemes, fraudulent elections, kickbacks, and systematic discrimination. Each revelation strengthened our case. The Department of Justice's Disability Rights Section joined the effort, ensuring that the full weight of federal law would be brought to bear on those who abused their power. For months, the task force worked quietly but relentlessly. We built a case that would not only bring down the Bakers but set a precedent for holding abusive HOAs accountable. We prepared indictments for embezzlement, racketeering, civil rights violations, and conspiracy. The class action suit grew, drawing in families from other neighborhoods who had suffered under similar regimes. And through it all, I kept Sarah close. She was the reason I fought so hard, not just for justice, but for the right of every family to live in peace, free from fear and discrimination. The day of reckoning was coming. The Bakers had tried to make an example of my daughter. Now they would become the example, a warning to every would-be tyrant that no one is above the law, and that the fight for justice is never fought alone. It began at dawn. FBI agents, flanked by local police, moved in with practiced precision. Mrs. Baker was led from her home in handcuffs, her composure finally shattered. Judge Baker, still in his robe, followed moments later, silent and pale. The charges were sweeping: assault, conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations. The Bakers' arrest sent shockwaves through the neighborhood and quickly exploded across local and national media. News vans lined the streets, reporters broadcasting live as the story of a suburban HOA's reign of terror and its dramatic fall captivated the country. The indictment detailed a pattern of abuse and corruption, embezzlement of HOA funds, systematic discrimination against minorities, disabled residents, and LGBTQ+ families, and a conspiracy to drive out anyone deemed undesirable. The Bakers' emails and text messages, seized during the investigation, revealed their intent in chilling detail. "Make an example of the Wilson girl," one read. Another, "If we keep the pressure up, they'll move. We'll get the house cheap." The evidence was overwhelming, and the public outrage was immediate. In the packed federal courthouse, I took the stand not as an FBI agent, but as a father. I described the day I found my daughter hanging from the street lamp, the terror in her eyes, and the cold satisfaction on Mrs. Baker's face. I recounted the years of subtle threats, the fines, the isolation, and the fear that had gripped our family and so many others. But the most powerful testimony came from Sarah. She wheeled herself to the witness stand, her voice steady but fierce. "I was never a problem," she said, looking directly at Mrs. Baker. "I just wanted to live here, to be a kid. You tried to scare me, but you failed. I'm not leaving, and neither is my dad." There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Sarah's bravery gave strength to other victims, who found their own voices as the trial unfolded. The prosecution laid out the full extent of the Bakers' crimes. Forensic accountants traced hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned from HOA accounts into Judge Baker's secret funds. Civil rights experts testified about the pattern of harassment and forced sales. Victims described how they were targeted, fined, and intimidated until they had no choice but to move. Each story echoed the same chilling strategy: identify, isolate, and remove. The digital evidence was damning. In one email, Mrs. Baker wrote to the HOA board, "We can't let these people ruin our community. Start with fines, then escalate." Another message to Judge Baker: "If anyone pushes back, you know what to do." The jury saw the problem neighbors list, with Sarah's name at the top and the word removal scrawled beside it. The defense tried to claim the Bakers were simply enforcing community standards, but the mountain of evidence and the testimony of dozens of families made it clear. This was a criminal enterprise, not neighborhood management. As the trial progressed, the fate of the HOA board became inevitable, with the Bakers facing federal charges. The remaining board members were removed by court order, replaced by a court-appointed administrator. The new administrator's first act was to halt all ongoing fines and penalties, review every enforcement action of the past 5 years, and invite residents to submit claims for restitution. Homeowners, once divided and fearful, began to speak openly. Petitions circulated to permanently ban the Bakers and their associates from holding any position of authority in the community. The administrator pledged transparency and accountability, promising that the HOA would never again be used as a weapon. The verdict came swiftly. The Bakers were found guilty on all counts. Mrs. Baker was sentenced to federal prison. Judge Baker stripped of his judgeship and ordered to pay restitution. The news made headlines nationwide, a cautionary tale of unchecked power and the resilience of those who stand up to it. But the real victory was in the community itself. Neighbors who had once hidden behind closed doors now gathered in the park, sharing stories and rebuilding trust. Sarah became a symbol of courage, her story inspiring others to fight back against injustice. The class action suit, bolstered by the trial's outcome, led to sweeping reforms in HOA governance, not just in our neighborhood, but across the state. For my family, the scars linger, but so does hope. Sarah no longer asks if we're safe. She knows we are, and so does every family who once lived in fear. The Bakers tried to make an example of us, but in the end, they became the warning that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law. The day of reckoning had come, and in its wake, a better community was born. But I wasn't finished. If the law could be twisted to hurt my daughter, it could hurt others, so I set out to change it for good. The trial had ended, but for Sarah and me, the real work was just beginning. The scars left by the Bakers' abuse weren't just personal, they were systemic, woven into the very rules that had allowed a neighborhood association to become a tool for discrimination. We knew that unless the law itself changed, other families would face the same nightmare. With the support of disability rights groups, civil rights attorneys, and a growing network of allies, Sarah and I began meeting with lawmakers at the local, state, and federal levels. We shared our story, not just the horror of what happened, but the hope that followed when a community stood up and demanded better. Our message was simple: homeowners associations must be accountable, and vulnerable residents must be protected. We weren't alone. Across the country, families shared similar stories of HOAs denying reasonable accommodations, selectively enforcing rules, or harassing those who didn't fit the mold. National organizations like Disability Rights Florida and the Special Olympics joined our coalition, lending expertise and amplifying our voices. Together, we drafted model legislation that would require HOAs to make reasonable accommodations for residents with disabilities, as mandated by the Fair Housing Act and ADA. Mandate anti-discrimination training for all HOA board members and staff. Establish clear, accessible processes for residents to report abuse or discrimination, with state oversight and real consequences for violators. Create a specialized state unit to investigate HOA misconduct, modeled after recent reforms in places like Florida and California. Guarantee transparency in HOA operations, including open meetings, published budgets, and independent audits. We testified before legislative committees, met with governors, and spoke at town halls. Sarah, now a confident young woman, became the face of the movement. "If my voice can stop this from happening to someone else," she told a packed chamber, "then everything we went through will have meant something." Within a year, several states passed sweeping HOA accountability laws. Federal agencies issued new guidance, reminding HOAs of their obligations under existing civil rights laws. And, for the first time, families like ours had real tools to fight back and win. Back home, the transformation was just as profound. The new HOA board, made up of former victims and longtime allies, wasted no time in setting a new tone. Their first act was to commission a full accessibility audit of the community. Sidewalks were widened, curb cuts installed, playgrounds retrofitted with inclusive equipment, and community spaces made welcoming for all. Anti-discrimination training became mandatory for every board member and staffer, with regular workshops on fair housing, disability rights, and cultural sensitivity. The board launched a transparent process for handling complaints, ensuring every resident's voice would be heard. They also established a community council, inviting input from renters, homeowners, and even local disability advocates. Perhaps the most moving change was the creation of a permanent memorial in the central parquet garden of native flowers, and a plaque honoring those harmed by the old regime. At its dedication, Sarah spoke to the crowd, her words echoing across the green. "This is not just a reminder of what we survived. It's a promise that no one will ever be left behind again." Sarah's courage resonated far beyond our neighborhood. She was honored by local and national organizations, awarded for her advocacy and resilience. Her story was featured in news segments, podcasts, and social media campaigns, inspiring other young people with disabilities to speak up for themselves and others. Families from across the country reached out, sharing their own struggles and victories. Disability rights groups reported a surge in requests for advocacy and legal support. Sarah began mentoring other kids, helping them find their voices and reminding them that their experiences and their dreams mattered. As I look back, I'm struck by the journey from heartbreak to hope. I acted first as a father, driven by love and outrage, but it was the power of community neighbors, advocates, lawmakers, and, above all, Sarah that turned our pain into progress. We proved that when people stand together, armed with truth and compassion, even the most entrenched systems can change. Laws can be rewritten, communities can heal, and the next generation can inherit a world that is just a little bit kinder, safer, and more inclusive. Our fight isn't over, and it never will be while injustice persists. If you face discrimination from an HOA or anywhere else, know that you're not alone. Share your story, demand accountability, and help us keep building communities where everyone belongs. If the story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe, and ring the bell for more stories about fighting injustice. Your voice matters. Tell us about your experiences with HOAs or discrimination in the comments below. Let's turn our stories into action together, because when we stand up for what's right, we don't just protect our own, we change the world for everyone.